We use pens.
Hi, hi, it's Jerry Roberts, and we are here with a special Getting the Band Back Together episode of Newsmakers. When last we met at TV Santa Barbara, it was March 5th. We had no idea that was going to be our last show for who knows how long. But anyway, Nick Welsh and Delaney Smith are with me. Josh Molina is here. Nick and Delaney are using some 1960s technology along with their electric typewriters.
We have some lemonade cans with string.
All right, so there's only one story left, and that is the coronavirus, the greatest pandemic in the last 100 years, the worst economic decline since the Great Depression, and with a sociopath in the White House, a vast political crisis as well. But then, you know, there are very local stories that we now have to look at through the lens of coronavirus. So that's what we want to talk about today. So let's start at City Hall. Nick, Paul Casey, the city administrator, said this is the worst disaster in 100 years. Kristen Sneddon, the city council member, said this is our Pearl Chase moment, we reinvent, and yet we're still debating whether to open State Street or not. So where do we stand on that huge question, that pre-existing condition question?
No, I think that you know, it's easy to belittle City Hall for debating what do we do about the planters on State Street in the moment of COVID, but to step back from that a bit, the crisis is big enough that it is forcing City Hall, which has been very reluctant to be experimental when it comes to State Street, which has been cultivated and manicured and polished for about 80 years now in terms of what it's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to be, that people are willing to take a chance and roll the dice and experiment. So we have a new economic development czar named Jason Harris. We have a city budget, which is $33 million, and who knows where it's going to come from. We've got, you know, the council about to go to the unions and say, hey, we're going to have to give you guys all a shave and a haircut. We're in desperate times. So they are willing to look at a regulatory rigidity, which in the past has made business people howl and property owners howl, and be flexible. So they're talking about, you know, it's an age-old discussion, getting cars off State Street so that way you could expand the sidewalk space for merchants and for restaurateurs, so that they can accommodate the volume of customers that they would need while at the same time maintaining social distances, so everybody can sort of, you know meet those objectives.
Josh, assuming there are any customers, which is kind of the big question hanging out there, I can't remember if it was you or Nick who scooped that that Nordstrom was leaving.
Josh did. Josh won that one.
No,
but cannabis is Forever 21.
It's a huge deal because. Wait a minute. Let me just ask you a question. It's a huge deal because. See, I knew this.
Let's settle this. Nick, I scooped Nordstrom and Target from 2001. Okay?
All right.
Don't ever forget about
Target. Come on. We all know.
I see. I knew this.
You were hammering on your computer on Wednesday morning trying to get it out, and then you looked.
Don't make me mute you. I'm going to have to figure out how to mute you. Josh, what is the...
on your ass.
Shut up. What is... Josh, what does the...
How come you can't get the mayor on your show, Jerry? What's
signify? What does it signify? Is this not the utter collapse of retail, which has been the backbone of downtown Santa Barbara for 30 years?
I'm sorry, Jerry. What are you asking about Nordstrom closing and the impact
What's
on
the
downtown?
significance of it beyond it's just one store closing?
Well, I think obviously Nordstrom has been shaky for a long time, and there have been rumors of its demise. So now it's going to happen. COVID-19 put it over the edge. I think we're seeing the end of the big box type corporations on State Street. And what you're going to see is a rise in the locally owned, smaller entrepreneur types who are going to be sharing space, who are going to be more creative. Obviously, Forever 21, Nordstrom, Macy's, all of these big buildings. I've heard rumors about Marshall's. Put that in your column, Nick, and call it a scoop. That I think that Marshall's might not be around for much longer. I think we're seeing a change because we're not going to have these corporations who are already suffering in malls around the country have any incentive to stay open in Santa Barbara. So what you have are these local businesses and property owners who are saying, hey, what can we do to save State Street? So we're seeing sort of a compromise on rents, and we're seeing shared spaces, and we're seeing sort of a collaborative effort to revitalize State Street.
Yeah, well, of course, you know, the meta problem here is that our economy, you know, aside from education and government, is based on tourism and retail. And, you know, the big question about the virus is whether that's going to be a sustainable economic base. But before the economy can do anything in a serious way, we have to reopen the schools because people have to stay home with their kids otherwise. So let me layer that piece of it on. Delaney, what's happening with the Santa Barbara Unified School District specifically about reopening? And, you know, the governor's apparently leaving it up to the local districts. What's where do things stand now?
Yeah, well, Carrie Matsuoka made it really clear that it's not going to be traditional brick and mortar in the fall. It probably won't even be anytime in 2021. The question is, are we going to start the year off with continuing online only education, or are we going to start the year off with some type of hybrid model? And that's the real question. But Matsuoka, honestly, Tuesday night was the second time he's ever publicly kind of discussed this, and he still is pretty unclear about where we're actually going. But what is clear is schools are not going to look the way that they looked.
And he's going to be gone, right, as of the end of the month?
As of June.
Is that still on track?
Yeah, that's still on track. Actually, the search for the superintendent, although we still don't know who these candidates are yet, but there was a recent report too on Tuesday, and they said that there's been a really large pool of good candidates to select from, just as many as they would have hoped for if there wasn't COVID. So COVID didn't actually affect people applying for the position. It does seem that Matsuoka will be out by the end of June. But yeah, like I said, reopening the schools, he didn't really have a lot of an idea, but I think maybe part of the reason he doesn't have a lot of an idea is because he's leaving, so he's kind of leaving it more open.
Right, and they kind of cut the legs out from under him on the one issue that was before them the other night about firing the food service workers.
Yeah.
Kind of, what'd you say, Nick? He took his ball and went home or something? It was...
You know, again, I'm just stealing from what Delaney told me, but yeah, it sounds like he sort of was very petulant about it, and okay, don't take my advice, but I don't want to have to think about this anymore. I mean, he was proposing to eliminate 21 positions. Yeah. In a time of the economic, you know, so the school board members.
Yeah, none of them except for Wendy Sims Moden, actually, which her perspective, quite honestly, has surprised me on this issue the whole time. But she's been the only school board member who's agreed with Carrie Matsuoka.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be sort of a thing, you know, that the president has to go along with the superintendent. But
Laura's the president, and she's vehemently against him.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Laura's the one that led the charge.
Yeah.
So 2020, Jerry.
Huh?
2020, Jerry.
Yeah, I know. I've been inside for a long time. So Josh, so the governor this week says that the state has a $57 billion deficit, and the county has, I don't know how many tens of millions. The city has 33 million. The school board is going to have one. So there's going to have to be a lot of service cutbacks and layoffs, salary reductions. Do you feel like, looking sort of from 25,000 feet, do you feel like our local leaders really grasp the scope of what is happening? Or do you think they're still down here looking at the other end of the telescope about just what's in front of them?
Well, there's lots of range in that question. There are people who think that this is the worst economic crisis in 100 years, and there are people who think we're going to bounce back much sooner, in a couple of years. I think City Hall, depends on who you ask. Paul Casey seemed to indicate that he was well aware of how serious the situation is, and he was attempting to show leadership by saying that we're going to have to all share the pain. I think he's aware. I think he's fully aware. He recognizes it. There's probably varying degrees on the city council, but Paul is recommending 5% pay cuts at a minimum. He's renegotiating with all the labor groups about taking pay cuts. There's going to be an increase in fees. There are going to be service cuts. We're going to see a big change in the next year. Basically, people will be earning less, and everything's going to be costing more in the city. Now, Paul,
the need for services, for social services, social welfare services, is going to be going up. I mean, it's just this really different.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the county stuff. I think the county board of supervisors will have to tackle the social services part of it. But Paul was already feeling a lot of pressure from the community before this, and this may be something that gives him an opportunity to step up and lead and try to appease some of the concern in the business community.
Yeah, because the knives are out for him. Are they not?
Somebody's going to go in that city hall, or in the city organization, whether it's the community development director or Paul or city attorney. But when this is all said and done, I think there's going to have to be a restructuring to appease the business community. And the business community is kind of all over the place on their reactions to all of this. But the one thing that they're effective on is pressure, attention, spotlight. The fact that they are letting everybody know, hey, we're watching, Paul is paying attention, and there's going to be some impact eventually because of all of that business interest.
No, you can definitely see on Tuesday night, he was feeling the pressure.
How so?
But he was telling me later, he said, city managers all throughout the state are just like, they're the first dogs you want to kick. Everybody's upset, everybody's angry, nothing is right, and city managers are among the first ones to get it. He said up in Arroyo Grande, the city manager there waited all of 1 day before he said, I don't need this, and quit.
Smart man. Smart guy. So Delaney, not to overly complicate the picture of what's going on, but at the county, they are in charge of preparing the plan to send to the governor to see if we can reopen or not reopen.
Right.
But there's a big hang up because of the scandalous outbreak of COVID at the Lompoc prison, which is still being counted in the county numbers, which make it impossible for us to meet the state criteria for a reopening. Where does that all stand?
Right. Well, but really quick, I do want to make it abundantly clear that even if we removed all of Lompoc's numbers out of our numbers, we still would not meet Newsom's criteria for reopening. Because if you apply his formula to our population, that would require 0 deaths from COVID over a 14-day period, and then also no more than 45 positive cases countywide total over a 2-week period. And so that's never happened once since the pandemic hit Santa Barbara. And even if you took out the Lompoc numbers, we would still be far exceeding that.
So they've requested, the county health officials have requested that the state change the criteria, yeah?
Yeah, they asked that the state, A, remove Lompoc's numbers, correct, but B, revert back to the earlier criteria that he released, I honestly can't say it off the top of my head, but I think it's like no more than X% of all cases, or no more than X% of all people tested test positive. And it's a completely different metric, and it's much more fair. And if you applied that metric to us, we'd easily be able to start reopening. And so the 3 requests were to change the death metric, to change the positive case metric, and then to remove the prisoner cases from our data, not to remove staff cases. Anyone who works for Lompoc prison or is a person who's in and out of the prison and is not a prisoner would still be considered and counted in our cases.
So that's just before Prince Gavin awaiting his royal decree on what'll happen or not.
Yeah.
Let me ask all of you about just sort of the communication during this whole period. It feels more and more to me like we had this sort of immediate emergency, flatten the curve, because we were going to overrun all of the hospitals and all of the emergency rooms and all of the ICUs and so on. And people were, very compliant with that. And that didn't happen. In fact, it didn't come close to happening anywhere. But it was never communicated clearly what happens after flatten the curve. And I feel like a lot of the, these protests and reopen this and stuff was because there wasn't really a coherent message. Is that?
That's really true, actually. And actually, Doss Williams brought up that point a lot on Tuesday.
Oh.
You guys had the same train of thought, but I mean, but it is.
Pivot, Jerry, pivot right now.
Yeah, but the term "moving the goalpost" has been thrown around a lot, and in terms of what we're supposed to be meeting in order to reopen, and it is true to an extent, because if you recall, even 2 weeks ago, at the Tuesday Board of Supervisors meeting, they were stoked. They were like, we don't know what the new criteria is going to be yet, but we're pretty much sure that we're totally going to make it. No problem. We're already on it. And then it came out and it was just like a giant, slap in the face of what is this? And we can't meet it with or without Lompoc's numbers. And so and we're not the only county to feel that way either. Our neighboring counties do also feel that way. And there was talk at the meeting of maybe partnering with them and kind of banding together.
Ventura and Slow.
Yeah, and in union to be like, none of us can meet this, so this is probably not the best metrics to have us go off of.
Yeah.
But either way, the county is still going full speed ahead as far as coming up with a reopening plan. They just came up with a name for it. It's called RISE. It stands for reopening in a safe environment. Yeah, reopening in a safe environment. And it's kind of like a complementary document to what Newsom has been putting out as far as which industries can open and how that looks.
Right.
But it's Santa Barbara specific, which is the cool part. And so hopefully that will be well received by the state.
So Josh, sort of transitioning. So the mayor has been criticized very early on in this for kind of being invisible. And now she's got this business task force and a very specific plan for reopening. How's that playing with her colleagues? I'm told that a lot of stuff is, she's just kind of doing unilaterally and not consulting with other council members. And then the other question I have in reading your story on what's in the reopening plan for the city, it's, again, all dependent on basically tourists coming. And you look at LA, there's a county that's still really struggling with its numbers. And, the cases are continuing to rise. What's your assessment of how she's doing at this point and of the sort of reality to fantasy relationship of the plan they've come up with?
Well, she had a really bad start to all of this, and to this day, there are people who are skeptical of what she has done and how she's done it. They feel as though she's worked with her supporters in a silo, and then they submitted this letter to the county without a lot of feedback from other people. It never came to the council for approval. She kind of mentioned it on Tuesday. So there are factions on the council that are developing, and there are people who believe that Kathy's not doing a very good job here in terms of unifying the council and the community, and that she's just looking to do something for the sake of doing something. There are others who feel like she has to react quickly and not everybody can be involved, and they had to get this letter right away. So she's sort of in this difficult spot, because if she did take the time to include everybody, people would say that she's not moving fast enough. And also when she moves fast, people are saying we're not feeling included. But make no mistake about it, people are really, generally speaking, not very happy with her leadership on this effort to communicate to the county what Santa Barbara's plan is. The restaurants have come together, the retail industry, the hospitality industry, and they've come up with their plans for social distancing, for how to serve their customers, how to be open and still comply with the governor's plan. The county obviously has all of that. And so the restaurants are ready to go should the governor say, let's move on to the next stage.
Yeah.
This is sort of a lot of cooks in the kitchen. A lot of people are trying to figure out what to do right now during times when no one's ever been in this kind of situation before. So you can't really expect a lot of perfection or anything close to that. People are learning as they're going, and it's going to change constantly. And one of the things that is the challenge at City Hall is we don't really have any strong unified leadership. So who's going to emerge out of that? We don't know. Megan Harmon is definitely one of the people who is positioning herself as somebody who's a unifier of all of these factions. So politically, that's sort of what's interesting to watch as everything is playing out.
Well, yeah. Let me follow up. Nick, yeah, let me go ahead. What I want to ask is, you had Kristen saying this is our Pearl Chase moment, and it seems like there's this, on one side we have this thinking of let's reimagine everything and have a visionary, restart of our city, reboot of our city, and then you have Paul over here saying, he's got his nose to the ground, he's got to deal with the immediate thing. Where's the mean of that? What's going to emerge from that, and what's your take on Kathy?
I think that the goalposts are always going to be moving, and that is going to be an ever-evolving picture. I mean, like Kristen said, is look, we can't just throw it through a few improvised moves out on the table and think we've solved the problem. It's a much bigger deal. I mean, it's good to remember that when the earthquake of 1925 happened and Pearl Chase stepped forward, they already had a plan long before the earthquake. So they wouldn't just like, oh, the earthquake happened and everybody said, I know, let's have a Andalusian Hispanic fantasy down here. That had been in the cooking books. We don't have a plan like that. That hasn't been. So we're kind of forced to improvise in a much bigger way. And at a time where it's very tempting to beat up on Paul Casey, or very tempting to beat up on Kathy Murillo because they're in the leadership positions. But the reality is everybody is fragmented. The business community, the downtown organization has been effectively without a sustained leader for 3 years? The Chamber of Commerce, for $50, named the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Oh, guess what? The Goleta and Santa Barbara chambers are just merging. So you don't have any organization representing the property owners of State Street, and they're all over the map. The organizations that used to show up on a regular basis to say good, bad, and different, they've all gotten old and died, to put it really bluntly. And you have Anna Marie Gott, who is sort of the loudest gadfly in the bee's nest, showing up and saying, I don't like anything. So you don't have a community, and then you have a city council that is for, it's district elections for the first time. So everybody's representing their districts, and you have a lot of young, relatively inexperienced people sitting on the dais, at least theoretically. So it's not an ideal picture for anybody in terms of, we had the worst disaster in 100 years. It's very fragmented.
All right, let me ask you this. So say we closed State Street to cars or opened it, as Kathy would prefer to say, and the 6 foot distancing, social distancing table arrangements were there. Let me just ask each of you, would you be comfortable going to a dine-in restaurant now? Josh?
Yes. I would be comfortable going into a dine-in restaurant now.
You would? You'd feel safe? You'd take your family?
Yeah, I would be. I think that with social distancing and, wearing a mask to enter, you can take it off when you sit down. I would be fine with that. I think that the businesses, I don't know how long they can go and still be able to be viable and survive without some kind of partial reopening. So I certainly would be fine with that, and I would protect my family so that we would just be smart and use common sense if we're out.
All right. Delaney, you're here speaking on behalf of the 72 million people in your cohort as Gen Z. Would you feel comfortable going to a restaurant now?
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to verbatim agree with Josh, but I mean, I don't think any of these businesses will survive much longer without a partial reopening. And I would,
so you would go as a civic duty.
That monetarily and go enjoy dinner and actually help a business stay open. But I do. I mean, I think as long as social distancing guidelines are in place, the thing that would honestly worry me the most, as someone who's worked in food service in the past, is most places I've worked in food service, like behind the scenes really isn't actually that clean. So I would hope that people step it up like for during COVID, but that's the only thing that kind of disturbs me about it. But I mean, the actual dining out on the street, no, as long as they're 6 feet apart, I don't see a problem.
What about you, Nick?
It would probably depend on the restaurant, and it would depend on where it was. I'm probably a little bit, I definitely believe in supporting local businesses, and I've eaten out way more under COVID than I ever did before because
Really?
I wanted to support local businesses, but I took it home, so I didn't eat at those restaurants, and a lot of those restaurants. I worked in restaurants a lot in my life, and I do know the corners are cut left, right, and center. And so I don't feel a great deal of comfort. I would want to buy local. I wouldn't mind eating outside. I definitely wouldn't eat inside.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Okay, the correct answer is no.
Said the man who has left his house 2 times in the last 8 days.
Says the man who is old and immunocompromised. No, it's funny because my wife is just, she's just like a hardcore no takeout. It's driving me crazy. I had to go to the doctor the other day, so I did a drive-through at Jack in the Box and got a breakfast burrito. But
you got to buy local, Jerry.
You better than that, Jerry.
You got to get local. Even though Jack in the Box is local, but
there's no other drive-in except that chicken place, and you're not allowed to go there for some other reasons. Okay, all right. We got 8 minutes left here, so let me just go around robin. So Josh, how soon do you think it's going to be before we get back to something resembling normal?
I don't know what resembling normal means, Jerry, but I think that there's a lot of effort right now
before we shut down.
The governor to be able to what? Like before we shut down? That's a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, I don't know, next year, probably. I don't know exactly how long that's going to take, but obviously the big concern is once we start to reopen slightly, whether the COVID-19 cases are going to increase and go up. So it's hard to predict, but it'll probably be the beginning of the year, 2021, before things are the way they were before.
Yeah. Delaney, I read this morning that the Garden Street Academy has canceled its entire academic year.
Yeah, I saw that.
How normal do you think school's going to be on a scale of, say, 1 to 10?
It won't be. Actually, I was going to talk about that earlier, and I forgot in the middle of my sentence. But no, I mean, that was one thing that the school board was focused on the other night was how do we manage the expectations of parents, because school's not going to be the same. And I don't know when it will be. I think that Josh's suggestion of next year is way too early. I don't think life is going to look how it was before the pandemic for years. I think we're going to get back to reopening businesses in a modified way sooner than later, but I don't think it'll be anything close to normal.
Nick, what's your forecast?
Well, I think the real challenge here is that we talk about the dimmer switch, and the problem is that Governor Newsom can adjust the dimmer switch just a little bit. But I think on an animal level, we as people will have almost an impossible time not overreacting to that. So if he opens it up a little bit, we're going to take a lot. And just a little bit of encouragement, we're going to be outside because there's a sort of desperate animal hunger to be out with other people. And, there's something profoundly unnatural about being cooped up the way we've been cooped up. And so you can't take the lid off a little bit. It's just going to come boiling over. And that's I think the real challenge here is going to be, when they start lifting some of the sanctions, can we control ourselves in terms of our, social gatherings and what need to congregate? And I think how we do that will have everything to do with when we go back to normal.
All right. Well, it's rare for me to sound gloomy about things, but on the public health side, I just don't see, any normality until we have a vaccine, which is probably 18 months away, fast. And
here's my prediction. Here's my prediction. Donald Trump has been infected. So what we're going to do, we're going to come up with a serological immunity. We're going to take his blood, we're going to clone it, and we're going to inject it to people. And then what's going to happen? We're all going to be immune, but we're all going to act like Donald Trump.
All right, there it is. You heard it first on Newsmakers TV.
Newsmakers have sharp.
All right. Well, thanks, Nick Welsh.
Newsmakers has
Molina. This has been an interesting experiment, and I really hope you upgrade your technology over there at the Independent.
Hey, this is how we keep going. All
right, thanks everybody. See you next time.
All right,
bye.
You guys take care.
You all there? All right, that was weird. I don't know how to. I mean, is there a way to that you're supposed to run a Zoom meeting about controlling the audio and stuff? I have no idea.
Jerry, are you still recording?
No.
Jerry, are you still recording?
No. I
it says you're recording. It says you are.
Oh.
Okay.